There was a time in Pixel Gun where it was relatively peaceful. People were just walking around, blasting each other with weapons, and everybody had fun. But then, all of a sudden, right around the corner, stood XX Shadow Demon Fox XX, and oh my god, it's a prototype! Quick! Take cover! There's been a ton of broken weapons throughout the history of Pixel Gun 3D, so let's go over them. The prototype was released in the 5.3.1 update. It's an epic sniper with a fire rate of 74, capacity of 8, and a mobility of 50. This is the first broken weapon in the game. It would one-shot any player at any spot. It used to have two different forms, the UP1 having green arrows and the UP2 having blue ones. This is the icon of the 2014 era of Pixel Gun. Everybody was talking about the prototype at school, at soccer practice, at your mom's house, literally everywhere. It was no doubt the best weapon back then. It lost its initial power over time to what I like to call the architecture effect, which is where Pixel Gun adds more features and mechanics to the game while not removing some of the old ones, which leave powerful weapons powerless. This weapon did receive balances though, but it's no longer the most dominant weapon in the game, which makes sense. There's a lot more legendary and mythical weapons now, so that was just bound to happen. It also had small changes to its shot animation, where an extra sound and pump was added, which I absolutely hate. In fact, Pixel Gun did this with a bunch of weapons, and it was just so unnecessary. The weapon sounded nice already, why did you have to change it? It's still a pretty decent weapon today, but I doubt it'll match the effect it had back then. And even though its rarity is epic, its status is legendary. The anti-gravity blaster was released in the 4.5.1 update. It's a rare heavy with a fire rate of 71, capacity of 6, and a mobility of 65. This was one of the first popular rocket jumping weapons. It was also a one-shot to all enemies when maxed out, and had a crazy travel time, so you couldn't even dodge it that much. You can definitely tell this weapon was made a long time ago. It's simplistic in design, but its entire concept is pretty cool, especially when you consider it's called the anti-gravity blaster and you can rocket jump with the weapon. This was definitely the most popular heavy back then, and it was really powerful. You can still use it today, but you won't really get any good gameplay with it. The original shot blue rings and the UP1 shot orange rings, and when Pixel Gun gave it a final design, they kept the version that shot orange ones. This weapon had kids throwing their Samsung Galaxy J2s across the room. This weapon also suffered from the architecture effect, much like a lot of these other ones. It's a cool weapon though, and it gets swag points for being old. There is, however, another heavy that I think is cooler, and it was even more broken. The laser minigun was released in the 9.0.0 update. It's a legendary heavy with a fire rate of 97, capacity of 75, and a mobility of 50. This was a super powerful minigun that fired off rapid purple beams. It was like a solid 2 to 3 shot kill. Good thing it wasn't as fast as an actual minigun, because that would have been genuinely unbearable, but it was still pretty annoying to go up against. If you hit your shots, you can get a ton of kills with it, and even with all of that, it got a buff to be even stronger. This weapon just lost its power over time due to many things being added. It literally hasn't gotten attention in 6 years, but man, this thing was worth the money back then. If you had 210 gems lying around at the time, which most of you probably didn't, then this was definitely the thing to get. I mean, you can still kind of use it now, but it's like a 10-shot kill. But even with that, I doubt you would still use it, because there's just better weapons in the game now. I remember when Pixel Gun would always offer to rent you this weapon. That and like the Impulse Sniper Rifle. The best place to use it was in Lighthouse, through that hallway. You could just stand behind the doors and shoot and get a ton of kills, and it was a lot of fun. It was broken, but it was still a lot of fun. But even though it was powerful in terms of efficiency, it was kind of slow, so you couldn't really move around a lot. But this next weapon doesn't have that issue, and it's probably one of the most popular broken weapons in the game ever. And if you defended this weapon back then,
kill yourself now!
the Stormhammer was released in the 10.0.0 update. It's an epic melee with an attack speed of 74 and a mobility of 85. This was the most broken weapon of 2015. In fact, this was Pixel Gun in 2015. When you heard Pixel Gun, you thought Stormhammer. It was fast, it was a 2-shot kill, and it had area damage. There was so much discussion about this weapon that there was even a term for players who constantly used it called hammer spammers. And at the time, it was the most expensive weapon worth coins, sitting at 700, which was pretty expensive back then. But the hefty price tag was definitely worth it. This was the most powerful melee at the time. Many of you might not know this, but this weapon weapon actually used to be legendary. I don't know when they changed it to epic, but they eventually did. So shout out to all the oldies who had a legendary Stormhammer. This weapon had some nerfs and buffs, but overall it's okay now. The area damage attribute got a well-deserved rework, so it's not as broken as it was. And there's no point of making it mythical because it's still a 2-shot. So if you got max modules on it, you'll probably get some pretty decent gameplay. Again, it's just one of those weapons that's really old, so a lot of the newer weapons overshadow it. But its design, sound, and effect are all still pretty cool. Looks 1,000 times better than the Thor's hammer in my opinion. The kaboom was released in the 10.3.0 update. It's a legendary heavy with a fire rate of 88, capacity of 8, and a mobility of 50. This is a rather obscure weapon that was overpowered. I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about it, but this weapon was a problem when it first released. It was a 2-shot kill with a fast fire rate and could land on any flat surface, and the contact detonator trait allowed you to predict where the enemy would land, making the impact inevitable. There's a reskinned version of the weapon called the Sly Avenger that I used a lot in my heyday, and it was criminally underrated. In fact, both of the weapons aren't that bad now even. Sure, they're not meta, but they deal some pretty good damage, and these dominate flag and point capture. The weapon isn't necessarily bad, it just got overshadowed by all the newer, more broken weapons. And to my knowledge, this weapon's never been nerfed. I feel like this weapon is also another symbol of what pixel gun used to be, more so in the name. I don't want to get too into it in this video, but it doesn't feel weird or over-explanatory like a lot of new weapons are. It's a weapon that shoots TNT, and it's called the kaboom, not like the TNT shooter or something. Definitely has tons of swagger in my opinion. Shout out to Kaboom and Sly Avenger users. You guys are the true goats. It sounded like I said ghost, huh? Speaking of ghosts, the Ghost Lantern was released in the 10.6.1 update. It's an epic heavy with a fire rate of 21, capacity of 1, and a mobility of 65. This weapon was the king of Coliseum in the pool party hallway. And the fact it was only 220 coins, everybody was able to get it relatively easily. It's super slow, but the projectile is so big that it had a wider range. It's also one of the coolest looking heavies in my opinion. This weapon also had a major problem. You see, Pixel Gun wasn't known, and still isn't, for being the most polished game, and at the time there wasn't a fire rate mechanic whatsoever. So what people would do is they would shoot the weapon, switch to another one, then quickly switch back and shoot it again, and they could just spam that weapon over and over and over again. There were literally lobbies filled with blue ghosts flying everywhere. It eventually got fixed, but yeah, that was a huge issue. It also got a reskin called the Soul Stone that was just as powerful and had the same design, sound, and projectile. Yeah, Pixel Gun was mad lazy back then. This weapon was more irritating towards casual players after that fire rate fix. If you got good movement, it's much easier to avoid the ghosts. It's still quite powerful, especially if you got good modules, but it's not as annoying as it once was, which is honestly a good thing. Because unlike this weapon, this next one was so annoying it eventually got removed. The Smart Bullet Bazooka was released in this update as well. It was a legendary heavy with a fire rate of 84, capacity of 4, and a mobility of 100. This was the homing missile weapon. There was the Beast Form spell, but it wasn't as powerful. Everybody could get it too since it was worth coins, and everybody was sick of it as well. It was big, it was black, and it was coming to get you. If you didn't see at least one smart bullet spammer back then you weren't playing Pixel Gun, probably playing Block Gun or something. This, along with all other homing missile weapons, were eventually removed, which was probably a good thing, but this weapon was super slow as well. So if you had a light melee, you could easily dodge it unless you were in like a small area or something. But yeah, the only resemblance of this weapon is a mere cosmetic. The Orbital pistol was released in the 12.5.0 update. It's a legendary backup with a fire rate of 89, capacity of 8, and a mobility of 75. This was one of the most unique backups in the game at the time. Instead of shooting projectiles like most of the others, it looms a huge beam wherever your crosshair is pointing and instantly fires an explosion. This weapon was a top 10 backup back in 2018. It was much more lethal when charged weapons didn't really charge, and that constant beat before you fired made it even more menacing. It used to be seen everywhere, not so much now. Man, remember when armory weapons were commonly used? This is also the first charge shot backup in the game. This weapon hasn't received any sort of nerf to my knowledge, but it's not that strong anymore. It used to be a 1 to 2 shot kill, and now it's like 3. They also changed the look of the beam, which looks way worse in my opinion. There's another weapon similar to it called the Airstrike Laptop, but that weapon isn't any better. The Orbital pistol is one of my favorite backups, and hopefully it can get updated soon. But back then, this thing was a solid problem. The Nanobots Nanobots rifle was also released in this update. It was a legendary special with a fire rate of 76, capacity of 6, and a mobility of 35. This was one of the few homing missile weapons in the game. Homing missile weapons in general were a big problem for casual players, and since the Nanobots was one of the strongest, it became a popular pick. It was mainly used in small maps since the bots weren't super fast, but it was a solid 2 to 3 shot kill. That doesn't sound too crazy, but keep in mind everybody's shooting at each other, so not everybody's gonna be at full health. So you can use the Nanobots rifle to swoop in and steal a kill or two, or 300. Like I said earlier, this weapon was eventually removed with other homing missile weapons. I'm not really sad that the weapon got removed, but since the homing missile attribute is back, hopefully it can make a return. The Christmas ultimatum was released in the 13.1.0 update. It has a fire rate of 58, capacity of 6, and a mobility of 50. This was the first weapon to have the cluster bomb attribute. For those who don't know, cluster bomb is a series of blasts that occur after the original projectile makes an impact, dealing additional damage. It was no doubt the most annoying weapon in the game. The projectiles were fast, it was a guaranteed one shot with a direct hit, and there was pretty much no counter to it at all. To give some credit to Pixel Gun, this weapon was supposed to be difficult to get if you were a free-to-play player, but due to Pixel Gun being at the time incredibly difficult in general, many resorted to modding the game, which then led to a bunch of people using it. Unlike other broken weapons, it's received quite a few nerfs and is still pretty good. If your aim is in dog water, you can get some pretty good gameplay. It just takes a little longer to take out a player, and that's a big little. That doesn't even make any sense. The anti-champion rifle was released in the 13.2.0 update. It's a mythical sniper with a fire rate of 60, capacity of 6, and a mobility of 65. It's the new and improved anti-hero rifle with a new color, sound, and a ridiculous amount of power. This weapon was a guaranteed one-shot kill everywhere. Tons of snipers were powerful, especially during the one-shot era, but this one was different. It had the swagger of the already popular anti-hero rifle, a villainous color scheme, and the best all-around stats in its class. This weapon dominated lobbies everywhere and is arguably the best sniper of the 2017-18 era. And the best part is, it's still really good. Sure, it's no longer the flashiest weapon in the armory, but it holds up nicely. Its availability in the armory is wishy-washy, but you can always buy it with coupons, and considering it's 500 gems in the armory, that's probably the better way to obtain it. There's an anniversary version that's even more broken, but it doesn't look as cool. If you want a really good gun that's heavily respected and will do the job and then some, get the anti-champion rifle. I have a lot of respect for this weapon, but for this next one, I have none, and I wake up extra early just to hate on it. The ultimatum was released in the 13.5.0 update. It's a mythical shotgun with a fire rate of 42, capacity of 1, and a mobility of 50. This is the most annoying weapon in the game. It's super powerful with a ton of range, and there's not much to counter it with. Ever since its arrival, there's been tons of discussion about it. I myself have talked about it quite a bit. It's basically the face of the game. Let me be clear, I think it's fine that there's a really powerful weapon in the game. Like I said, I really like the anti-champion rifle. I just hate how broken this one is. There are some changes that could be made that could balance it out a little more, like forcing a reload regardless of if you switch like it's on the soda plus pop. It's still super frustrating to go up against. I doubt there's gonna be any serious adjustments to the weapon, but whatever. On the bright side, there was another weapon that almost topped its irritableness. The solar flare was released in the 18.1.0 update. It's a mythical heavy with a fire rate of 83, capacity of 1, and a mobility of 50. And oh my gosh, this weapon was the absolute worst. It shot a huge ring that could one-shot anybody, and that ring shot beams that would hit anybody the ring didn't get. If someone shot this weapon in your direction, you were pretty much dead. I'm not sure what went through the devs' heads when they made this. There was no counter for this weapon, and it went for a measly 350 gems when it was released. And the worst part is, I kinda like it. The weapon looks sick, has a dope name, and sounded really good. And of course, the devs had to change that.
Oh my god.
The weapon received a nerf where it was still kind of OP, but better than its original form. Instead of guaranteeing a one-shot, it guaranteed a two-shot. It then got another nerf where it got completely crippled, and it was never heard of again. On one hand, this weapon would have been worse than the ultimatum had it not been nerfed, and at the very least the devs did that. But on the other hand, this weapon was very sex, and now it's virgin. There's been numerous broken weapons over the years, like the Goose Substance Scythe, PGA 06 TV, Ferocious Poleaxe, Axe, Aphrodite crossbow, buffed ice paws, raccoon with a pipe, hyper mega cannon, triple bite, Cerberus, ice club, battle falcon, bloody terror axe, luxury beats, Bedivere, conductor of souls, pasta sniper rifle, the Titan lottery set, the Mr. Fruit lottery set, the intelligence bow, one punch gauntlet, the fake pistol, and so many more. Pixel Gun does this constant thing where they make a very broken weapon, then nerf it later on when the hypes died down, and at this point it feels like it's on purpose. I think there should be really good weapons in the game. It makes the weaker ones a little more fun, but you don't have to make one so unbearably difficult to counter, and then make it completely worthless later on. A lot of the broken weapons are pretty cool, and people still want to use them, they just don't want them to be impossible to go up against. It would be nice if this stopped happening, but we all know it won't.